Welcome to Urban Interest. Today we have a special interview with Dr. Vitti from DPSCD. Good morning, Dr. Vitti. How are you?
I'm good. Good morning. I'm glad to be on the show.
Thank you for coming. So we know that there's a lot going on in the country, definitely in our state and in our city, but we definitely wanted to drill down today on getting a better idea of what your vision is coming out of a school year during an entire pandemic, and also what will be next upcoming for the new fall. Also the summer, if we're going to have a summer school program. Let's start off with the budget. So recently the state has approved a budget, and they're saying that there will be equal funding for all Detroit public schools across the state. What are some of the ways that you plan on using some of this funding? And also, will there be more allocated for Detroit public schools, community district?
Well, that was being promoted, honestly, is a bit misleading. Yes, per pupil funding is increasing with next year's budget. We're always excited that we're seeing an increase in per pupil funding, but the inequality that exists within the state funding system for K-12 is still strong. What the state legislature and the governor has not addressed is a legacy hold harmless provision that allows wealthier school districts to keep the 18 mills that they generate at the local level. Every school district in Michigan has to tax at 18 mills, and that tax goes to business owners and homeowners that rent out their property. Proposition A that was passed several decades ago was intended to create more of a floor. So a floor, so at a minimal level, every school district received a minimal amount, but you had to tax at 18 mills. When wealthier districts like Bloomfield Hill, Southfield, Birmingham tax at the local level at 18 mills, they naturally generate more revenue.
Right.
And the state allows them to keep that revenue. So when you apply about 50,000 students that we have in DPSCD to those districts, they actually generate 160 to 100 million more than we do in Detroit. Wow. So although it's exciting to see a per pupil increase in the state formula, we're still not talking about equality, and we're definitely not talking about equity, meaning giving more to those that need more. But you know, with that said, knowing that the legislature over the years have not provided large increases per pupil, we're excited about this budget because it is an improvement from last year. We will receive about 25 more million than we had last year. Okay. But based on the impact that the pandemic has had on large urban school districts throughout the country, and really all school districts throughout Michigan, Michigan saw a 50,000 student decline in enrollment in the pandemic. We saw about a 2,700 student decline. That increase in per pupil funding will fill the state revenue gap that's created because of the loss of enrollment due to the pandemic. So basically we go into this year with no state revenue loss. And so we're excited about that. We weren't going to have to cut anything anyway because of federally the COVID relief funding that's coming into the district. So at the end of the day, you know, for the average person paying attention to the budget, we're even from a state revenue side because of the increase, but it's not really an increase for us because of enrollment.
So we're balanced, but we're not there with the necessary funding and resources that we need to improve some of the conditions that have been longstanding. And I do want to talk about the federal, the COVID monies that we are going to receive. But before I do that, you mentioned something about the mills and how we're capped at 18 mills. In your opinion, well, let me say this, for a lot of us in the community in the city of Detroit, we have become increasingly frustrated with these tax captures and these millages, that somehow the dollars never seem to find their way home to where they were appropriated for. In your opinion, in your experience, have you had any discussions with any of the state legislators of how maybe we can leverage our power, come together and figure out how to put a new millage on the books or amend proposal A to make sure that we really direct some more of those dollars to our schools and our libraries. So our children need a much more competitive curriculum and opportunities to be able to compete with those school districts like in Birmingham and Sterling Heights and Troy.
Yeah, I would say the burden should fall more on the federal and state government, less on the local. I think, clearly Detroiters are overtaxed, and anyone that lives in Detroit knows that, obviously, and any kind of study will show that. What we need to do in Detroit is advocate for equity at the state level. And frankly, that's not only the legislature, but it's also the governor. I mean, the governor, I think, has done good things for K-12, good things for Detroit. I think she protected people well during the pandemic. But at the end of the day, we can't just talk about increases in per pupil funding at the K-12 level. We have to talk about equity. And that means giving more to those that have less. And I'm being unapologetic about that. We're talking about increases in per pupil, great, but are we really talking about redistributing wealth? That's what we need to talk about.
But how do you think, go ahead.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
How do you think we can get that done, really accomplish that goal, if we're continuously taxing on these mills and we're allowing for those who are benefiting from those dollars to actually not pay into a system of where, again, it was appropriated? I definitely get your point about, going to the federal government and their responsibilities. But I guess if I was the federal government, I would say, hey, you're not even ensuring that the people right in your own backyard are paying their fair share. And not that anyone who's dealing with the issues in DPSCD, you don't have a lot of flexibility, let's say that, to fight a huge issue like that. But I guess that's always my concern. Should we go to the top before handling those who are an issue right here locally? Yeah, they're stealing from our kids. That's the way that I look at it, to be honest.
I hear your point. I don't, when you look at Title I, which was, all about giving school districts with concentration of poverty more resources, the federal government is structured to give more equity, if you will, and resources to districts. But the problem is you have a state system that ensures inequality. I mean, at the end of the day, you have a system that allows districts with stronger tax bases to give more per student to their kids. I mean, we're talking about facilities. We're talking about higher pay for teachers. You're talking about more wraparound services in a population of students that don't have the same needs that our kids have, because of the impact of poverty and the legacy of race in this country. So, I don't disagree with you. I think that if you're going to allow for tax breaks, and there has to be more responsibility put on those corporations.
Checks and balances.
To give back to Detroiters, to give back to the children of Detroit. I mean, we've seen, I think, better structures of that with the FCA situation, where Southeastern is going to receive $1 million for its advanced manufacturing program. And since the board took office and I became superintendent, we have held the city more accountable to ensuring that dollars are going back to children in the school system if there are tax captures happen. The deals that happened, with the Illich family, those things happened before an elected board even took place and before I became superintendent. We haven't had those examples since we've been here, but that's also about local control. I mean, you're talking about a school district that was run by an emergency manager that had no accountability to Detroiters at all. And that's, when a lot of these tax capture, tax breaks actually were ushered in.
So I definitely agree with the point about needing stronger accountability, but also transparency. So let's talk about these ARPA funds. How much is DPSCD scheduled to receive, and have you received any portion of that?
Yeah, these dollars are a great example of equity. I think President Biden a Congress led by Democrats have really stepped up and gone beyond rhetoric and actually implemented reform that's going to have a short and long-lasting impact, a positive long-term and short-term impact on Detroit DPSCD children. So it's $1.2 billion. If you look at the amount of money that was given before the beginning of the school year up until going into this year, we are now finally, as of a couple of days ago, slotted to receive all the dollars. The Republican legislature was holding up those dollars as part of the negotiation with the governor on the budget. But those dollars are going to be mainly used, one, to get students back into school this fall, to address chronic absenteeism, to address learning loss, and our facility issues. Those are really the three main purposes of the dollar. So starting in the fall, we'll be able to put a nurse in every school. We're going to expand mental health support for our students at every school. We're expanding summer school this summer, and then we'll do the next summer as well. And that means more academic support for students over the summer, more course recovery, but most excited about it, more enrichment. So more performing arts, more music, more athletic opportunities over the summer for students.
What about more, so have you received any of the money yet? I know the city has received their first half. That's why I'm asking.
Half. We've received about half at this point, and now that the legislature has approved the other half, we should be getting it in the next couple of weeks.
Okay, with that said, let's go back to, you talked about your top three priorities of how you want to use that funding. Yep. Also, what about upgrading equipment and software? Would that fall into the category of the curriculum side, getting kids to come up to whatever the standards are for education and learning, where their literacy rate and things of that nature should be? Is that where that bucket will fall?
Yeah, I would put that in the infrastructure budget. I said facilities, but I think it's broader. It's infrastructure. One of the, if you will, one of the positive aspects of the pandemic was the opportunity to give every student a device, a laptop with an internet access. We'll be able to continue that for the next couple of years because of this funding. And upgrading the infrastructure in all of our schools, so you have stronger wireless access in all of our buildings. And all
will that support the neighborhoods? But
I guess if you're right next to the school, you might be able to access that way, but not beyond that. But all the curriculum can be accessed online now, so you don't have to have the hard copy, hard text or the workbook. Now all the curriculum is accessible online. So we did that going into this school year. That'll continue. So that puts us on par from a resource issue as compared to other school districts, considering that we haven't had the resources to do that. That's just on the technology side to answer your question.
So would you consider, this is something that I've definitely proposed publicly, since the city has a bucket of money, and I haven't seen within the appropriations resolution from the city specifically how they want to address the digital divide. I've suggested, why don't we partner with DPSCD and make sure that we actually come to a more, have a more robust approach to remedy this issue. Is that something that you would consider? Because I know partnerships was something that was listed in that appropriations resolution, but from the city, not from DPSCD.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've done quite a bit with the city with previously summer programming, busing, always willing to do, to work with the city and other, government agencies, nonprofits, in order to expand resources and get into corners and cracks that need to be filled with lack of access. So if there's a plan that we feel benefits the city at large and DPSCD, then we'd be willing to do it.
What about, you talk about laptops and tablets all the time. What about printers? And let me tell you why I asked that. I just think about those who have more of a learning curve. It's one thing to give them all of this information to read at a screen. And I think some of those with those learning challenges, it's much more of a daunting task. But imagine if they had a printer where they can print some of this out, because a lot of our children, they're operating off of a hotspot, let's just be honest, who are within the school system. But could we consider getting some of them printers, and also so they can print out some of their work that they have to turn in? But I'm really thinking about those who need a hard copy to be able to take more advantage of decreasing that learning curve.
Yeah, well, we've been talking about having at individual schools more of like an IT hub setting for students. So students can go consistently to a place in the school to print. So that could definitely happen. And, you know, what you're seeing today more of is submitting documents and assignments just virtually, just putting it in a Dropbox, sending it as an attachment, and that reduces those extra resources when you talk about the need to print. But if something does need to be printed, then the networks can be connected and creating a hub at the school so that a printer can be used at the school. And the same thing for families too. I think we're moving in that direction as well.
That would be great, because I know for a fact there are some people who have those challenges and they need to print out some of those documents to make sure they learn. Okay, so let's talk about this summer school program. Talk to me about how that will work and how many weeks and which schools it will be made available for.
Yeah, so we've been with the dollars that were the COVID relief funding that we're receiving, 44 schools will be open for summer school. And those schools were picked not only to have geographic spread throughout the city, but they all are air conditioned. So, I think that's an important point in the summer based on, those hot days that we get. So 44 schools, a combination of K-5s, K-8s, and high schools, geographically spread to reach all the corners of the city. Transportation is provided. At the high school level, the focus is course recovery in ELA, which is English Language Arts, Math, Science, and Social Studies. So we saw students, drop off online because of the pandemic and falling behind on credit. So that's one strategy. We're also offering more dual enrollment so students can accelerate by taking college classes at the high school level. So they get college credit, which reduces tuition.
This will be during the summer school?
Yes. Yep.
Oh, great.
And then at the K-8 level, the focus is mainly on literacy and math, with just enrichment opportunities. But what we're probably most excited about is offering more enrichment opportunities outside of just core academics. So we have a lot of partners that we're bringing forward for performing arts, music, art, athletics generally. And so right now we have about 10,000 families that are signed up for this year's summer school programming. If anyone sees this, go to our website. You can sign up as of the last day or the beginning of summer school, July 12th. So anyone can just, go to the website. You can walk into any of those 44 sites and sign up. You can just do the academic portion, or just do the enrichment portion, or both. Everything.
And this will all be online?
It's all online. Yep. All the 44 sites, the programs that are offered at each of the sites, the registration process. But again, if you just want to cut through all that and just show up on the first day, you can. And we'll let enrollment stay open for the first couple of days of summer school, the week of the 12th, just in case people are just busy and don't get the chance to register.
I hear you talking about science and math. What about reading comprehension? I always feel like that's a gap, right? And I know, is it still on a standardized test? It's been so long since I had to take one, but is reading comprehension still on a standardized test?
Yeah.
And we need to look at civics. I'm in the politics and in the community, and it is so frustrating. You get a host of people who are asking you about things that is totally not, within this level of government. But go ahead.
I was an English language arts and a social studies teacher, so I'm with you.
Okay.
So yeah, a standardized test is still required starting in 3rd grade until 7th grade, which is called the M-STEP. And then in 9th through 11th grade, the literacy portion is embedded in the PSAT or the SAT. And those are state requirements. But The summer programming offers course recovery at high school. And then we do from kindergarten to 8th grade, we have literacy intervention courses and programs that we use with our students, either personally, one-on-one small group with a teacher, academic interventionist, or even software programs that can be done online. So those are all things that we've embedded. Before the pandemic, we actually were seeing an increase in student achievement defined by test scores, but obviously the pandemic, like everything else, put a wrench into our work. So we're going to restart that coming the fall.
All right, so DPS has some of the lowest COVID rates, and we hear a lot publicized in the media about DPSCD, but we don't hear this story being, more widely publicized. What are your thoughts around that? And then also, how will that impact your plan for reopening in the fall? Will you allow more students to start coming in, and what's your vision?
Yeah, from the beginning, going back to last summer, it was, our position was that it was about equity of access, meaning if students had access to face-to-face instruction in suburban schools and in private schools, then they should in DPSCD as well. So that was what we did from the beginning. We did that throughout the year unless, the infection rates were high and the contagious rate was just too high that we thought it was unsafe for students and for our employees. But with all that said, you're right. I mean, when you look at the number of outbreaks that we had and positive cases, way lower than other school districts. And I think that's just because Detroiters took COVID very seriously. And as a school district, we knew we had to be more sensitive and proactive on the safety strategy. So, from the beginning, we invested in temperature check machines. We did symptoms checks verbally at the door. Our employees had to do that. We maintained the requirement to wear a mask. We did fund a nurse at every school.
Which I'm happy to hear. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, you're
we
fine.
need more nurses and social workers than we do police officers to have that access for our children. So I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, and we actually had a separate, we contracted with a separate group of individuals to walk all of our buildings on a weekly basis to ensure that we were doing what we said we were going to do. So that included deep cleaning classrooms, deep cleaning offices. By the end of toward the end of the year, we ended up implementing weekly COVID testing, not through the nasal test, but through a saliva test that our students and our employees took. So every best practice that was recommended to stop the spread of COVID, we implemented as a school district. And that's going to be the plan for the fall.
Masks will still be required, even though, it's been lifted as a state requirement. Will masks still be required?
Right now, masks are still required. Honestly, we're talking about it right now. We're talking about maybe not having vaccinated people wear the mask, but that we haven't made a decision on that. Right now, everyone wears a mask. Unless you're outside and you're vaccinated, you don't have to wear a mask, or if you're in a room where everyone is vaccinated. That's the only examples where we're not requiring the mask as of today, July 2nd. But we're going to talk more about that going into the fall, because there are vaccinated employees and families who have vaccinated children that are saying they don't want their children to wear a mask, or as a teacher, they were vaccinated, why do they have to wear the mask? That's the conversation we're continuing to have. But at the minimum, the unvaccinated individuals will have to wear a mask. That's probably where we're headed in the fall, or everyone just wearing the mask.
One last question before we wrap up. You've been here for how many years in the school system?
5.
5 years. In your opinion, what's the number one thing that you can do as a superintendent and work with the school board to make sure you support the administration, so the teachers and the staff, especially coming back from, a partially vaccinated, community? What do you think that you can do?
What, me personally as superintendent? What can I do, or people out there listening?
No, what you can do personally as a superintendent. You've had the opportunity to kind of see what the biggest issues are and where they need the largest area of support.
Well, I think this is the case for any leader, but I think especially the leader of DPSCD is to listen to people. I think I have been successful in, increasing enrollment before the pandemic. We had 80 audit exceptions down to 0, no financial penalties. We had 500 teacher vacancies, now down to 0, no teacher vacancies going into the fall. Going through a water crisis, this pandemic, it's about listening to people and where they're at, and then changing and adjusting to meet the needs of families and students. And so I think as we go into the fall, the thing that I can do the most is continue to listen and actually implement what I say I'm going to implement with fidelity and be held accountable to that. But I think in particular, it's going to be reaching out to families and based on where they are right now on the other side of this pandemic. And that means doing home visits. And I think that's what we did in the pandemic, but we have to knock on doors, talk directly to families, talk directly to students about the importance of coming back to school and listening to them about what are the challenges that they're still facing to come back to school on a regular basis and to problem solve through that. So is that extra van to pick them up in the morning? Is that adjusting the schedule of classes after offering more at night, more on the weekends? Does that mean smaller class sizes? All of those things. We've had listening sessions, but I'm looking forward to doing more home visits over the summer, just so we have more students back in school, and we can make school more engaging and more interesting to keep students in school. That's always been a challenge for us, but it's going to be even more of a challenge because of this pandemic and how it is disrupted the normal educational process.
And probably increased chronic absenteeism. I just want to say, for me, for the teachers, just hearing some of the concerns, while I know that all students probably won't return in person in the fall, maybe taking a look at some of those supplies that they purchase out of their own pocket, since we have more money to help supplement that. But thank you so much for joining us today on Urban Interest This was a great conversation, and we hope you come back soon.
Always. Thank you.